My name is Victoria Cawley, and in today's video we're going to be repurposing my old playhouse into a new doghouse for my pet Aspen. One of the most important factors for any construction or deconstruction process is safety. Safety includes wearing the proper gear. Proper gear is safety goggles, construction boots, long sleeves, and jeans. Along the way, I will also be telling you more additional ways that I will be being safe. We already have the base and the structural support of the playhouse, and it's still sturdy. So we're going to be removing this portion of the playhouse and repurposing the wood to brace it and help the structural support even more. To remove this portion of the playhouse, we're going to be using 3 tools. The first 2 tools are a drill and a ratchet. The drill and the ratchet are both used to unbolt the bolts, but the ratchet is used in case some of the bolts are extra tight and we need more manual power. Next, we have a flathead screwdriver. Some of the bolts have caps on them, and we're going to be using this to pry off those caps. Before we could continue with the rest of the bolts, we had to prune some of the trees. I'm using a branch cutter. To start taking this down, you have to make sure that you've planned ahead. For starters, we're taking down this part of it first, because once it's done, it can swing down and hit someone's head. After removing 2 of the bolts, I already felt the beams loosen up. For the next 2 bolts, the beams might fall down, so I'm standing up here so that there is no way that I can be harmed.
Go. That's fine.
Now I'm going to be removing the slide and the ramp in the back, but before I do that, I have to clear the area of the shrubs. To start off, I'm going to be using a grounded electric hedge trimmer. You have to take into consideration a lot of the safety factors. As you can see, I'm wearing goggles, and you have to make sure that the cords aren't wet. Next, I'm going to be unbolting the rock climbing wall from the main part of the treehouse. There's 2 bolts connecting these pieces together. To unbolt them, I'm using my drill again. Coolio. For this part, I needed help from my dad. The next part is taking off the slide. We had to change the driver of the drill because these are just regular bolts. After removing the 4 screws, the slide is ready to be removed.
Congrats.
Are you doing it?
Yep.
Oh. The next part is unscrewing the slats to be repurposed later. The wheel is interfering with some of the nails, so I'm just going to keep those slats there until I can take the wheel off. The wheel is also leaking! Next, we have to switch the driver again because these are the regular screws. Okay, all the slats are out. Next, I'm going to be removing these two pieces of wood. I have to use a flathead screwdriver to pry off the caps and a drill. There we go. Next, I have to take off this piece of wood, but I have to be extra careful when doing this because it might fall on me. Next, we just have to do the same exact thing on the other side of the treehouse. Just in there. Oh my God, the next step is going to be taking down these beams that go over the edges. Once again, we have to be extra careful because once I take out these bolts, this might swing down and hurt someone. You always start with the bottom. Next, I'm going to move to this side and do this bottom for more safety. I can actually take off both of the caps because removing the caps won't make anything fall. There's a bee, so we really like that. You want to make sure that you're not putting any of your own weight on these beams in case they do fall. Okay, as you can see, the beam obviously fell. There was also a pole connected on the other side which also fell, so you want to make sure that your dog or someone who's helping you isn't standing over there. Next, when we do this side, this whole thing is going to fall down. Okay, and I'm just going to watch out. Woo! Now we have to do the other side. Next, we have the two beams on both sides that we have to remove. Hi. Hi. So far, these are all of the materials that we have that are going to be repurposed and used to build the doghouse. Next, we're going to be repurposing the slats for safety railing for the balcony. First, you got to take your measuring tape and measure how long it is. Ours are 31.5 inches. we're going to be cutting these in half. So that would be at 15 3/4 inch. Which is about right there. So I marked it with a piece of chalk. And next I'm going to be using an angle to make sure that I'm getting a straight line. Next we have to repeat this step with all of the other slats. Next, to clean it off, I'm just going to hose it all. Now we have to take apart this rock wall. So the first steps to doing that are removing each pieces of the grips. I'm repurposing the slats to use as a banister for the upper part of the doghouse. We're doing this by taking the full slat and cutting it in half. After you've measured and cut the first one, all you have to do is mark the slat and then cut it. Now we have to take the slats that we already cut and sand them down. Now, since we're also putting plywood on the bottom, I have to measure the bottom too. Now, since we don't need this piece of wood or this piece of wood, I'm going to be using a drill to screw them out. This is the piece of plywood that we're going to use for the base and for the top. So what I have to do is measure it out so that we can cut it. Next, I'm going to be using my angle to make a straight line across so we know exactly where to cut. Now we're going to put this piece of wood in for a dry fit because we still have to add structural support under it. The reason we do dry fit is to make sure that the pieces will fit exactly how we need it. I measured it wrong over here and this won't fit into it as we need it to. So all I'm going to do now is take an angle, a pencil, measure it again, and then we're going to do some more sawing. Dry fit number 2. During dry fit number 2, we still did not succeed. So all we're going to do now, once again, is take the angle, remeasure, and saw again. Dry fit number 3. That's what we're talking about. I learned 2 very valuable lessons from the unsuccessful dry fits. Measure twice, cut once, and if you don't succeed, try again. As you can see, the plywood didn't cover the whole base, so we got an extra piece of plywood that we're going to cut to make it fit perfectly that we also have to notch out. Once again, my dad will be helping me with the sawing. This was the leftover piece from the original piece of plywood that we're using, so we're going to use it on the top. We can use smaller pieces of wood on the top because it already has the support that it needs under it. Once again, we have to cut out notches. Dry fit number 1 for the top. Now for the top of the doghouse, since I don't want any water to get through, I'm using a waterproof wrapping to seal it off before we put the plywood on. We're gonna need 2 separate rolls of this because it doesn't fit all the way across, but that's okay. You're gonna have to notch out the side for these things. Now that we put the plywood down, we have to drill in some screws. Normally when you're doing this, you have to drill a pilot hole. But since we have self-tapping screws, that saves us a step. There we go. This repurposed piece of wood is used as the structural support for the base of the doghouse. All we have to do now is mark it with a pencil and drill it into place. Now I'm going to be drilling this second structural support beam for the base into place. Make sure that you put 2 screws on one side so that it's sturdy. Right now, I'm going to be repurposing and harvesting this big piece of wood that was the monkey bars into a structural support beam for the walls of the future doghouse. The first step to doing this is by taking my drill and unscrewing all of the screws that are already in place in the monkey bar so that we can actually use the wood. Now we have to remove this hardware, and so to do that we're going to use a ratchet. After removing all of the hardware, there is still some nails that we have to drill out. Now we have these stairs, and there's 3 more pieces that need to come out. We have this last wooden piece needs to come off, and these 2 pieces of hardware on the side. As you can see here, we already have our first structural support beam in place. When you're drilling it, you want to start at the top to make sure that it stays at a 90-degree angle. Now I'm going to be placing in 2 more screws just to make sure that everything is nice and sturdy. After we place our 2 structural beams, we have to notch out the floor. To do this, you have to measure the distance and the width of the structural support beam, draw it out on the floor, and then we're going to notch it out with the saw. After attempt number 1, we clearly realize that there's a problem because the floor is not in place where it should be. What we realized that we didn't do is we only measured the structural beam to be notched out. But what we really had to do was measure the width of the bottom and the base of it to also be notched out. So now we just have to take it out, recut it, and make an attempt to. After increasing the size of our 2 notches, we are now going to try attempt number 2. At attempt number 2, we realize that the floorboard is measured perfectly and in place. Along this line right here, we have a structural support beam under the piece of plywood. So we need to drill the screws into the plywood, into the structural support beam, so that the structural support beam can be used as support. Now I'm going to be painting the plywood to help protect it from the rain, and it'll make it last longer. Before we put on the plywood, we put in 2 structural beams under it for extra support. Those beams are here and right here where the 2 pieces of plywood meet. We've marked this one with a straight edge, and to make sure that the plywood is steady and firm in it, we just have to use a screwdriver and nail them in place. Two pieces of plywood are now sharing one structural support beam. So when we put these screws in place, we have to put them in at an angle to make sure that we can get the maximum support needed. Now we're going to be putting up the banister. The first step to doing this is taking our piece of wood, which is this piece, and we're going to screw it into place. We have marked out the exact spot so that it's exactly parallel to this front piece here, and we're going to clamp it in place so that when we want to screw it in, it'll be easier. Now we're going to do the other side, the same thing. We're going to clamp it in so that when I drill it into place, it is secure and in place. I guess my dad is clamping it. Since both sides are clamped now, I'm going to be screwing it into the wood. Now we just have to do the same exact thing on all 3 sides. To make the banister, we're using the pieces that we previously cut in half. Before you do this, you want to measure out how long it's going to be, and we measured it to 50 inches, and we divided that by 5 to get 10. So we're going to use 4 boards, each placed 10 inches away from each other. A key trick to doing this is placing the board right on the bottom of where it goes in the top, like this, marking it from this side so that you know it's exactly perpendicular, and then once you're going to screw it in, flip it around so that you know so you know exactly where you can put the screw. I've already marked each place where I want to place the middle of my boards. For this, once again, I will be using my screwdriver and a 1.5 inch screws. To make sure each piece is perpendicular, after you put in the first screw, you want to take your angle and make sure that it's lined up perfectly on a 90-degree angle. Your bottom piece, your bottom screw. Another trick that we can use to make screwing each board into place easier is before we place this board, where it should go, is we screw one screw halfway in. We do this so that when we're putting it here, even if it moves a little bit, the wood doesn't turn as much as it normally would. This is also why it's very useful to draw the line on top where it should go, so that when you're placing your nail into it, you already know where the middle should be and where it's safe to drill in. For this part, you'll notice that we haven't put in a banister yet. We're doing this because we still have to put the ramp in place. As you can see, the piece of wood that we're using for our ramp, which was our old rock climbing wall, is not ready to be placed as a ramp. We struggled a lot trying to take these pieces off, so we have to use a wood cutter that's going to chop off a little piece of the wood to get them off. After disassembling the climbing wall using a Dremel, now we have to unscrew the middle board that's under it, and we're going to do that by drilling out the screws in place. As you can see, the ramp is now cut in half, so now we're going to be able to use it. This beam is clamped in place so that when the ramp is connected to it, we have extra support. Now what we're going to do is take a super long screw and drill it in. Now we do them again on the other side. And this piece is hanging out on purpose because it's 23 inches out and the ramp is going to be 23 inches wide. So on this side over here, there's no piece hanging out because nothing needs to be supported there. We're going to be using this ladder so that on the opposite side of the ramp, if you don't want to walk up the ramp, you can use a ladder. But if we kept this side of it, it would run into the fence, and so that obviously would not work. So I removed this piece of the wood, and now we're going to cut it right here. Now what I'm going to be doing is screwing in the ladder so that if any humans want to walk up to the top, we easily can without having to use a ramp. As you can see, I'm screwing in the ladder to the support beam. I'm actually going to be drilling this bottom board into the base of the doghouse for support. Now that I've measured my plywood, the exact size of the wall, I'm going to be using my 4-foot T-square to mark and measure the wall so that my dad can then cut it out. Okay. After we've cut the piece of plywood that we're going to be using, we did a trial to see if it was correct, and unfortunately we forgot to notch out a back piece of wood. The structural beam that we placed in the back has to be notched out so that we can get the front wall to be in front of the side walls, but this is not even to each other, so this just has to move back just about an inch to reach this. So to do that, we have to notch out the back. After our second trial of putting it in, we successfully notched it out. So now what we're going to do is use the drill and screw in the first wall. We're starting at the bottom and working our way to the top. as I previously mentioned, these screws are my least favorite because one, the drill bit is always difficult to find, and two, it's very difficult for me to drill these screws in, so anytime after this, I will not be using these screws. Now that we've cut out the door that Aspen is going to use to go into and exit the doghouse, all I have to do is screw it in. As you can see, it's already been clamped. We had these pieces that we kept after we took down the original climbing wall because it was on a slant. So this piece went up like this, just like this. As you can see, these holes line up so that when it was attached to the playhouse previously, the angle was correct. I don't know, you could change the angle pretty much. So now what we're doing for the ramp that we're building is we kept these pieces. We're putting on new pieces of wood that we measured before. We use these pieces as a template so that we have the same angle and so that we know where we have to put the holes so that it can attach to the treehouse once again, which is now actually the doghouse. So, since we need to keep these pieces, unfortunately we can't repurpose this wood for anything, but we're reusing these metal pieces and these screws. Now, as you can see, we have clamped our two pieces of wood into place. Well, we've actually only clamped one piece of wood into place, and then the second one I'll be drilling in later. So now I'm just drilling in the pieces, wood to wood, drilling in pieces to secure the ramp for the dog. As you can see, I have flipped over the ramp, and so now what I'm going to be doing is drilling in each of these boards onto the 2x4 that we measured before, using my drill and my screws once again. I have my paint pan. There's a piece of paint in it, so that's really nice. I'm gonna obviously be pouring the paint in here to make it easier. You want to be very careful when you do this as to not get paint in undesired places. You also don't want to put too much paint in it so that in case you don't need all of it, you're not wasting that much paint. So I'm gonna do that, and then I'm keeping it up here for now just so it's easier while I'm painting this side, and then when I need to paint this area, I'm going to move it. Never actually used one of these before, but I've seen them a lot on YouTube and on movies. Now that the paint on the inside is dry and on the outside is also dry, I'm ready to place my final wall. As you can see, I've painted both sides of the plywood I'm using red. And since it's extra long, we're just using the excess plywood, and we have to use 2 pieces of scraps to make it one wall, because we're not putting any of this to waste. This bigger piece of plywood, if we put it here, it doesn't go the full length. It ends right here, which we have marked already on the floor, on the base of it. So we put this extra beam up so that we have something to screw this into. Right here is a piece that has been screwed into this bigger structural piece of wood, and this is called a toe. This piece is also just used for extra support so that we can nail this piece and this piece into the ground, obviously for support. And we also have an extra piece back here that is used so that we can screw these pieces together and this structural piece that's been there from the beginning into place. All of this is just for extra support so that we can screw the wall into place and that nothing falls down or breaks in the process. I'm going to start off by taking my screwdriver and 2.5-inch screws and using 2 screws to drill in my toe. I'm going to screw this first structural beam into the second one that's hidden behind it. As you can see, even with all my power, or most of my power, it's not moving, which means that we got a good structure and good support. My dad mentioned that we can either put this side and have a closing at the bottom like we did with all other sides, because when we do that and keep an opening at the top, it lets the air flow in and the air flow out. But if we drill this into place up here and at the bottom, there would be an opening. If we want to clean it or hose it out, just take a hose and spray. If any rainfall somehow enters it, the opening at the bottom will make it easier for maintenance. So that's what we're going to be doing. A little more difficult. And the pro about this is that if we left this side open, it would be visible. If we keep it open on the bottom, the ramp is going to be coming right here, and so it's going to be hidden anyways. So we're going to clamp it now into place. This is the bottom side of the ramp, and we put this longer beam and this longer beam in for support. And now we're placing in 3 beams, this one, that one, and that one, horizontally instead of vertically like these ones, so just for more support.
Next, I added white block letters, blue sand paint, and flowers, pumpkins, and other accessories around the doghouse for the garden.
After a long process, we have finally finished the doghouse. We have a shelter for her, a garden, a ramp with sand paint on it for extra traction, which makes it easier for her to go up and, come here, come, go up, 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 go up, go, go up, come on, go up, and a balcony for her to watch all the birds and the squirrels on, and for her to eat delicious treats up there. That's all.